people oftentimes dance around the money conversation because it's uncomfortable. Well, I'm not going to show you my cards because you haven't showed me yours type of scenario. I'm not going to tell you my budget because if I tell you it's a $1 million budget, then you're going to build $1 million house in your head. In some sense, that's right. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the NS Builders podcast. I want to start talking a little bit about the conversation around hiring a builder, working with a builder, the steps that you should take. And I hope this is helpful to not only other builders and peers of mine, but also to someone that's considering building, whether that's with us or another builder. So today, let's dig into how to find the right builder. And there's a lot of things with around this conversation, and what it really comes down to is, in my opinion, it really comes down to the relationship, and it really should be considered a relationship because these are long-term relationships in the sense that this isn't a one-time purchase. You're not meeting me one time, purchasing something, and going on with your life. It's usually this back and forth banter. It's we're working together through difficult decisions. We're working through very personal decisions, being that it's part of your home, and whether we're building or renovating, we're there for multiple months. It could be multiple years. So really, the number one thing, in my opinion, is finding someone that you jive with from a personality standpoint. Personality means a tremendous amount here, and if you think about dating, for example, that the personality really does play a big role in how you guys get along and how you guys work together really well. And for us, this goes both ways too. A builder should be interviewing a homeowner just as a homeowner should be interviewing a builder. And it should be this mutual respect for each other, this mutual understanding what the goals are, this mutual agreement as to how we get there. And I don't necessarily mean that from a technical standpoint. If we're going to, do something technically one way, the homeowner doesn't necessarily have to feel as though they understand how they're going to put together the pieces, but at least have an agreement as to what the expectations are. Now, expectations is exactly what I wanted to dig into. Those are really important to set in the beginning of the project. Setting expectations and then maintaining expectations. Setting expectations goes for everything. And if we want to simplify it down to three things, we can talk about scope. And scope is going to be the overall description of what we're doing. What is the scope? Well, we're going to build a 4,000 square foot house. We want it to be passive certified. We want it to be a healthy home. So we want to use healthy materials. We want it to have 4 bedrooms. We want it to have 3 bathrooms. We want the kitchen, the kitchen to be an open concept with the living room. And obviously those are really broad details. And then we're going to get into the specifics. Now, secondly is budget. We want to make sure that we're setting the expectation of budget. And this goes for you as a homeowner. If you're listening, we're going to ask what that budget is up front, and we want to understand what your budget is. Oftentimes, I feel like people oftentimes dance around the money conversation because it's uncomfortable. Well, I'm not going to show you my cards because you haven't showed me yours type of scenario. I'm not going to tell you my budget because if I tell you it's a $1 million budget, then you're going to build $1 million house in your head. In some sense, that's right. I mean, if you're going to tell me that you want to spend $1 million, I'm not going to then come to the table and say, here's an $800,000 project, because you've communicated that you are willing to spend $1 million, and we're going to transparently show you how we get to that $1 million. And what I mean by transparently is that we're going to take that $1 million, write it down on the top of our spreadsheet, and then work through our scope of work to figure out, going back to the scope, let's use this 4,000 square foot house, for example, and let's just call it a $2 million house. All right, I want to build a 4,000 square foot house, and I have $2 million to build it. Well, we're going to write that $2 million down. We're going to understand it's 4,000 square feet. Real quick math, that's about $500 a square foot. The first thing we're going to do is gut check, like, hey, based on what they're explaining, can we build a house for $500 a square foot, or do we need to consider, bumping that up? And let me touch on that real quick. We're not going to price our work based on square foot. However, And because I say that a lot, especially meeting with a client. However, when I do communicate a square foot number, it's usually based on historic data or other projects that are currently under construction, or in pricing. We can compare them to saying, hey, this is a modern aesthetic. It's a relatively simple roof line. We're going to go through it, and that kind of ties out to what you're describing. And looking at what we've priced there, we've priced that at $500. So yeah, $500 is a realistic number. So going back, understanding budget, we want to make sure that if we want to gut check that, make sure that, yeah, what you're describing is a $500 or $2 million project. And we need to understand what that is up front, and because we're going to work in favor of that. Now, I do recommend that if you're going to be communicating, what that budget is, maybe leave yourself some fluff. Maybe leave yourself 10%, where you're going to tell me one number, but you're okay with it growing 10, 15%, and we're not going to go to that top, because psychologically, again, I'm going to design, or I'm going to work towards that 2 million number, because that's a goal. That's exactly what it is. We're setting a goal. We're setting that expectation. So we're going to come to the table with a $2 million option to hit what we have described. Now, maybe we're unable to hit that 2 million mark, and we're at 2.2 or 2.3 based on, these conversations as this evolves. For us, and for, working with a builder, it would be helpful that you're working, they bring an option to you. What you're describing is $2.3 million, but if we were to consider some of these value options, we could get this project down to $2 million. Now, going back, I've talked about this a lot, we'll come back to that. The last thing is schedule and timeline. And it's really important to understand, everyone tends to say, I want to start right away. Well, that's great, but what is your goal as far, the more important question is, when do you want to live here? When do you want to actually enjoy this house? When, what is my drop dead delivery date? Because usually that ties out to something. Renovations, it's always some sort of party, or I'd love to have it done before the kids go back to school. Building a new house is oftentimes the same thing. There's usually a life event that matters. And for whatever reason, for many reasons, it usually ties around when children go back to school, because they need to be back in that district, or it would be difficult to get them to that school. But understanding what the delivery date is important. And, one thing that I've learned in my career is to make sure that, we need to be conservative with that, because a client's always going to say, I'd love to get it done in this many months. And, oftentimes I feel like as a builder, we oftentimes say, yeah, we can make that happen. When in reality, we need to digest that. We need to really understand what this project takes, and be more conservative. So we're not going into it saying that, yeah, maybe we can get it done in 9 months when we really need 12. And, we've already casually committed, even though, I won't hold you to it, even though we've casually committed to saying, yeah, we could probably figure out how to do it in 9 months, that's the number that's sticking in their head. Once you mention that low number, going up from there is always difficult. So it's important, as a builder talking, to make sure that we're being conservative, lean on the high side, and we can work towards the more the more aggressive, or the more refined proposal on time and cost. Now, this is about finding the right builder. Those are the important things to really get on the same page with, right? Making sure that as a homeowner, that you're on the same page with your builder for those three things, scope, budget, and schedule. And those are incredibly important to this process. Now, working through and interviewing a builder, let's go back to the personality. We need to make sure that they're not only on board and they're aligned with you for those goals, but how are they reacting to those? Are they willing to work with you? Are they willing to help put together a plan? Is there the opportunity to bring them on board early on in the process to help develop this? Or are they going to be the type of builder that wants to get a set of drawings from an architect when they're done? Hey, get the drawing designed, send me the drawings, I'll price it, and then we'll build it. Or send me the drawings and I'll build it. If that's the approach that you want to take, that's fine. I don't recommend that, because I do think that this is a collaborative effort, and a builder, an architect, and a homeowner, this triangle, should work together throughout the whole process. That includes pre-construction, and we're going to get into that in another episode. But get a gauge for how that builder is reacting to, working and being mutually and having mutual goals with you, and understanding what this project really means to you, how you're going to get there, the steps in which that builder is going to take to get there, he or she, I should say. And again, it really just comes back to, do you guys jive? Does this builder have the not common sense, but does he have the blanking on the word, the knowledge? Great. Does he have the knowledge to build? And, and I think about, everyone has to build their first house in order to build their first house. And, and for us, we have continually grown into, another market almost every year. And for us, because we're trending towards a particular goal. Now, I want to, understanding what the builder is capable of is really important. And I don't think that and I'm speaking to, specifically to us, is it doesn't necessarily mean what they've done in the past is their limit. I think having a conversation, for us, we're interviewing for a project right now where it's evident that we've never built anything like this. And, and I've actually been to the table for another project, invited to look at another project that was, massively, a massive leap for us as far as size of project. And they ultimately didn't hire us because we didn't have the experience. We've never built something like that before. Everything else checked the box. They said that everything else was great. They just wanted to work with someone with experience of building that before. So as a builder, talking to a builder, that's really challenging. And I think we'll touch base on that on another episode of how to break into a market that you haven't broken into before. It's, how do I build a bigger house? How do I build custom $5 million homes if I only have built $500,000 specs, and breaking into that, and and I want to break into my thought process on how I've kind of navigated the waters there. But again, going back to our discussion today, how do you find a builder? In that sense, that client called me and interviewed me and talked to me and was understood that we hadn't built that particular project before. And what does that mean? How does the client feel confident in the sense that we can build a product like that we can, that we can be accurate with it, that we can bring our best foot forward. And what it comes down to is the knowledge and the education that the builder has put themselves through. And, ultimately, the way I look at it, as a big project is just a bunch of little projects, or the same amount of scope, just kind of compounded. So, if we're doing an addition or building a house, we're still placing concrete, whether it's a small addition or it's a full house. And yes, it's definitely more complex. And that's where, a builder that has a great reputation with his trades, his partners, and things like that, they work collaboratively behind the scenes to make sure that they're bringing their best foot forward. How do you make sure that they have that reputation? You have to do references. You should be talking to some of their previous clients. For us, I always like to include a client that we're currently working on. And I find that that's important because they're immersed in our process. They're whether our process is going well or poorly or needs improvement, we're constantly refining. We're not perfect. And, we try to keep tabs on everything that we do to make sure that we're always maintaining expectations. But having the ability to talk to some previous clients and then some current clients is massively important. You reach out, hey, can you send some references? You talk to them, you ask them the questions, and ask them the questions that you're worried about. And, hey, I'm worried about schedule. How were they on schedule? And, well, what? The reality is they were great with schedule, but, from a budget standpoint, we definitely had some overruns, and this is what we dealt with. And make sure you're talking about your concerns. And I would actually add to the fact that when you're talking to a builder, bring up those concerns. Hey, one of my really important, one of the things I'm really worried about in this process is schedule. We're really tight on schedule. Do you really think that you'll be able to complete it, or should we consider something else? And be upfront and almost offer them the out. And I'm not going to say every builder is going to take that out. They're still going to want to be competitive, especially if they're in this competitive mindset of I need this job, or I'm competing against someone else, and what are they going to say? But have this transparent conversation with the builder and just explain, like, hey, it's really important to us to make sure we're hitting our schedule. Is what you're communicating here on this proposal, or what you've communicated thus far, is that realistic? Do you think we'll actually be able to maintain that? Or do you think that we're going to need to be more conservative and we should add some fluff onto that because of supply chain issues, or just because looking at other projects that you've done? And you know what? And frankly, I'm asking you because I want to hear it from you, but I'd also like to ask these same questions to your references, because, they've went through it. Were you on time with that project? And I think having this open dialogue, being transparent, and being understanding that, everyone is human. It's this human interaction of, I want to get on the same page. I want to work together, and I want to have same common goals. And the only way we can do that is being open and honest with each other. And if I were to wrap all this up, that's what it comes back down to is, when I say personality, I mean having an honest relationship with someone, and, being honest with yourself, being honest as a builder, being honest as a homeowner, and being upfront and make sure that the goals are clearly communicated at the beginning of the job, and then get some feedback from the builder as to what, can he deliver upon those goals, or is it being done in a too aggressive of a manner that puts you down a path that you end up completing the job, but it's behind schedule and over budget, and it becomes this frustrating thing. Because for us, relationship is hugely important, and when we miss the bar on schedule or budget or communication, it's something that we take very seriously and want to make sure that we commit to correcting that every single time that we have a blip. And I will say that my team has done an incredible job about maintaining expectation, but we will always continue to improve on that. And there's no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to continue to maintain and hopefully exceed expectation. So hopefully that answers some of your questions on how to find a good builder. If you have additional questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you guys want a t-shirt, make sure you click the link below. We'll see you guys next week.